So Carlos, a little bit bleary-eyed because the draft rankings updates as a never-ending process. You're watching a lot of games. You're out this weekend checking out Stanford, but we have updated draft rankings, and I would start by asking this question. We also have a staff draft today. Jamie Arnold is our new number one, the FSU left-hander, but in the staff draft, you went a different direction. Is this possibly the time that we're going to see the thing that can never be done actually done? Could we see a high school right-hander taken 1-1?
If there's going to be a year for that, I think we're having the stars align for it in this year's draft class. I mean, Seth Hernandez, who's right-handed pitcher at Corona High School, as you mentioned, I had the first pick in our staff draft, our first of the year. I promise I did not give myself that pick intentionally. It was a randomized order. But for me, when I'm looking at the top of this draft class, and Jeff kind of jokingly mentioned it to me last week, man, there's really no obvious number one player in the class. We're still struggling with that. It's a bit of a hassle. Every time I talk with scouts at fields or on the phone, especially for the teams picking up inside the top 10, they're like, hey, who do you have up top? We don't have a very clear favorite in this range. There's a huge swath of players still being considered. None of the college players who are positioned at the top of the board have really grabbed that number one status with any conviction. Even Jamie Arnold, who kind of moved into that spot as the de facto number one in our most recent update, his last few weeks have not been the most dominant. I think there are a lot of cracks you can poke in all of the college profiles at the top of the class. We don't have any pure hitters like Travis Bazana. A lot of our top college hitters you see here, Ivar Arquette, Marquise, and Dean Curley, they're all right-handed hitters. Last year we had a lot of left-handed hitters that teams really prefer. All other things being equal. And as I was going into this staff draft with the number one overall pick, I'm just looking at, okay, what player has the most upside here in this 1-1 spot? And I really do think that's Seth Hernandez. He's a high school pitcher who's been up to 100. He's got a 70 grade changeup, maybe the best changeup in the class. He has two legitimate breaking balls that could become above average or plus pitchers. He's a great athlete. So I think in terms of upside, if the Nationals wanted to go that direction, his talent is equivalent with any of the players we're talking about here. It's easier to do that in a staff draft than a mock draft because it hasn't happened. But you look at guys like Jackson Jobe, Hunter Green, who have gone near that range in recent years. I think those picks stack up pretty well. So I wonder if this is the year we'll just throw risk to the wind and take a high school righty.
So that's the thing that stands out to me is normally when you talk about something like this, you say, oh, you can never take a high school right-hander at the top of the class. Like it's too risky. It's just, you're crazy if you even think about it. But I would point out with that is that because everyone's now kind of factoring in that risk, Carlos, like as you said, like the track record has actually gotten a lot better because almost no one ever does it. So the only reason you would do it is because you really, really like this pitcher. It used to be a guy threw hard, really hard, he'd be at the top of the class. Now that's not really the case anymore. But with this, like, is this maybe an opening for an Ethan Holiday to be 1-1? Because again, the college guys in this class, there's a lot of guys that seems like that teams like, but it's hard to find that guy that teams have that 100% conviction in at the top of the draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could say that Ethan Holiday has the best hitting and power combination in the class, high school or college. I think with Holiday, he's a player that you don't really have the same sort of lever to pull in the spring in terms of affecting his draft stock, what he does against his prep competition. It's not going to materially change his profile. Now, if he came out with a significantly different tool set, maybe that would change the profile. But everything we've heard so far this spring is Ethan Holiday is kind of the player that we saw last summer. He was already number 2 on our board entering the year in conversation to go in that 1-1 spot. And I think in terms of his upside potential and maybe like the perceived floor, just given his track record as a hitter in this high school class for years now, would maybe think, okay, that's a little bit safer than a high school right-hander. Typically the elite high school college or high school hitters in a class, I should say, the track record of those players is pretty good in general. So that wouldn't shock me either. I think there's maybe 10 players who still have a legitimate case to go in that one spot.
Jeff, is there anyone who jumps out to you at the top of this class that you're like, okay, why aren't we talking about this guy?
Not really. I mean, honestly, I focus most of my work on the pro side of things. But I think the thing that's astonishing to me is just how quickly the conversation around 1-1 has just transitioned almost like on a week to week basis, it feels like throughout this draft cycle. And that's like what I was joking about with Carlos, last week was just it feels like he hasn't had sort of like a standard, maybe like top 2 to 3 options sort of draft like we've seen in, years past, the last like 2 years or so. Just like nobody from the college side has performed, hitter or pitcher, in a manner that is, sort of made themselves into a position to be like, yeah, this is a no doubt sort of safe top of the class kind of pick. And I think the other thing I'll throw back at Carlos too is just how much has maybe some of the recent underperformance with top college hitters in particular taken in the top 10 picks maybe impacted, some of the warning signs that scouts and front office people maybe see through a bad stretch that maybe gets them a little bit more worried than it might have 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago.
Yeah, I wonder how much of it is just the college offensive environment is so loud. It creates so much more noise in the last few years than we've seen in the past. So like I've talked to a lot of scouts, and this is not necessarily like a critique of the top of the class college hitters typically, but I could easily see it maybe impacting them as well. But there are a lot of college hitters who are not legitimately pro prospects that are putting up crazy numbers. So I do think if you're supermodel driven, maybe there's just a lot more noise and a lot more refining of the data and the performance that you might have to do to have confidence. So maybe that's something, and you don't have that as much on the high school side. But it's going to be interesting to figure out who's going at the top of this year's class.
For all the talk about torpedo bats, like the bats that really we should be talking about are the college bats, because we are seeing, like, okay, you may have thought that Yankees Brewers, those home run, that game was crazy. We're seeing that every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday in college baseball right now. We're sitting here at Major League Baseball's at like 4.2 runs per game, I think, right now. College baseball's flirting with 7. It's something where, like Carlos said, the offensive environments are really high up here. And by the way, we got a good question here from who asking, who has the highest floor, Carlos, in your opinion, to be safe 1 of 1? If you're going to go reduce the risk, who's the high floor option here?
I do think that's Jamie Arnold, and that might be part of the reason why he's just in that one spot. I mean, this is a pitcher who a lot of scouts think could be in the major leagues a year from now. He has done it in one of the better conferences in college baseball. You don't have to project too much on him. He's got a really solid track record of throwing strikes at a high level. He's a college left-handed pitcher who has 2+ pitches now. The changeup is a pitch that metrically has looked really impressive. Just behind the plate, it's looked really impressive. So I think you can look at him and say he has a chance to be a pretty safe middle of the rotation arm. I think of him in almost a similar profile as like a Rhett Lauder, just a really advanced college pitcher. Maybe not the same sort of pure upside as a Chase Burns or Hagen Smith, but with less of the risk that those pitchers had a year ago as well in terms of just starter profile. So he would probably be the guy that I point to. On the high school side, I mean, maybe it's just Kason Cunningham, who is a Texas shortstop, and maybe the one hitter in this class that you could feel comfortable putting a 6 hit on. At the same time, you're talking about floor. It feels like maybe a stretch to go with any of the high school players, but that really pure hitting high school track record has done a fairly nice job in the past. So those would be 2 on the college and high school side that I would point to if you're looking for floor that I would feel comfortable with.
Anything else, Carlos, that jumped out to you from the staff draft that, like any little insights that you got for that? Check that out at baseballamerica.com. We did the top 40 picks, which includes a pick for each and every team, because if you go to 40, you get the teams that don't have first rounders. So, but anything else that really jumped out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you even see this when you read the rationale of the writers, but when you're picking at the top, there's a lot of anxiety because you're not sure who exactly is the name you should be picking. You want to slam dunk. But as we move throughout the middle of the first round into the 20s, into the 30s, I'm really struck by the quality of the players who are still on the board. I was still really excited about a lot of the players that I had a chance to grab, the players who were going around me. And so I think, and again, this is what I've heard while talking with scouts out at the field, teams that are picking in the middle and the back of the first round, teams that have multiple picks are really excited about this year's draft class because the depth is so solid. There's a chance they're not taking talents that are much different than players going inside the top 10 range. And you feel much better about those talents when you're taking them at 18 or 20. And then you have teams like the Orioles and the Brewers and the Royals, who are picking multiple times within the top 40. They've got a lot of pool money to work with. So I think those teams are actually quite happy with the composition of this year's draft. There are a lot of interesting college bats in that range. The pitching depth, the left-handed pitching depth on the high school and the college side in particular is exciting. There are a ton of high school shortstops that I'd be really intrigued with. So I think teams who are picking in the back half or maybe middle of the first round and later are actually pretty excited with this draft. That's what stands out to me.